if you go to the CIA as a doctor, you're still practicing what you learned as a doctor, but you may be doing it in just very unusual environments for that. But lots of people had misconceptions about that when I was there. So I used to get a lot of hate mail.
What kind of misconceptions?
Oh, well, lots of people think that you are the spy, like you're the one who's supposed to be going and getting things or exploiting people, and I think that was around the same amount. That was around the same time when, at the agency, there was a big debate because that's when the enhanced interrogation program was going on.
That was John Kiriakou, the thing he blew the whistle on.
And there was a real divide in our community of physicians, like saying, I think it's unethical. You can't be involved in it. Yeah. And there was another group who thought, no, they could. And now, more than 20 years later, we can see that, sort of when you torture people, it ruins our ability to prosecute them. So like the recent ruling in Guantanamo Bay, Judge McCall said you can't use confessions that have been elicited under torture.
Because people will, if you're torturing somebody's child in front of them, they'll say whatever you want them to say, right?
I mean, if you think about it, torture as a political tool might be very useful for a dictator, right? You can scare your opposition. You can make people frightened of you. You can probably get some information from people. But as an intelligence gathering technique, once people figure out you're not going to kill them, or that then you have no hand, really.
There was a CIA psychologist who lives like an hour from here, who was one of the guys of the architects of that whole program.
Yeah.
I think they made like tens of millions of dollars for that. I forget the guy's name. I want to say Mitchell.
Yeah, Jim Mitchell.
Yeah,
I knew him. Bruce Jesson and Jim Mitchell.
Yes.
And I knew them both. Yeah.
Yeah, that's that whole thing was crazy. The enhanced interrogation stuff, and what they did was, I believe they had black sites all over the place, right, where they were doing this stuff. Yeah. But my thing is like, I imagine torture's got to work to an extent, right? If you don't go too far, like it's got to be like, how else are you going to get answers from people if they're going to hold back, and you gotta hold their feet to the fire to some degree to get.
That's the really interesting part, though, historically. Like from World War II and on, most seasoned interrogators have said, no, you don't.
Really?
Yeah, that you work with people over time, they get to know them, and people begin to tell you things. I mean, the dilemma, I think with it in the program as it ran, is that people were never able to say, well, what did we learn from torturing anybody? I mean, I used to tell people, like Alan Dershowitz had once said, get a torture warrant, right? When people were arguing over, was this a good thing to do or a bad thing to do?
A torture warrant.
Yeah, just get a warrant to torture people. But you might as well admit it, because people were kind of going, oh, it's not torture. Well, everybody knows it was now. And he said, look, if that's what we're going to do, get it. And I used to tell my colleagues, I said, well, then show people the data. What did we learn from threatening to kill people, right? Or torturing people.
Right.
And then the public needs to think about that and say, what do you want your government doing? But in the world of intelligence gathering, whether it's Hans Schiff's work, and I'm blanking on the U.S. interrogator who worked in the South Pacific.
Who's Hans Schiff?
He was a German intelligence officer who used to interview POWs and get lots of intelligence from Americans. The other fellow, I'm blanking on his name, but it'll come back. But the work really suggests that when you create a rapport with people, you actually learn more from kind of a softer approach over time. I think the fantasy that everybody has is that there's a ticking time bomb. That suddenly, like, you must know something that's going to kill a bunch of people in a matter of hours, so we need to do anything we can to get you to tell us, right now. But it doesn't turn out to be true. Most of that information is pretty perishable. Yeah. So that was a disappointing thing.
Well, I would imagine that with all the money that and research that we put into stuff, like when it comes to war, that we would have had I imagine by now we have a much better way with technology and AI to extract information out of people's heads.
Or just getting info.
Trauma.
I mean, remember, well, yeah. I mean, that's what I used to say, is sort of trying to get intelligence out of somebody by like waterboarding. They were dragging them around wrapped in plastic with giant ice cubes until they die, which happened.
Right.
was like, man, that's like banging on the radio with a sledgehammer saying the reception's got to come in better, right? And like in most of my work, me and Gary Hazlett were able to show just raising stress degrades cognitive function really fast and memory, so that you're changing the very organ that you're relying on to provide you the information that you think is going to be helpful. Right. So it never made sense to me. But I mean, if you think back, it was, for intelligence gathering, I mean, Hans Blix, when we were all arguing over, was the WMD in Iraq? And he's like, no, there's not. And then it turns out later, we know that Curveball was busy selling his story to a bunch of people going, this is what Saddam Hussein's doing. But there really wasn't. So I think it's true that if you're systematic with a lot of open source information, and maybe the AI approaches will even be better, you probably can get a pretty good picture of what's going on, rather than saying it's only one single source who knows it. There's probably some unique situations where, a single person might be the holder of knowledge nobody else has. But if that's the case, then they know you're not gonna kill them if you need it, right?
Right.
So it's like the stories you hear now about having to waterboard Khalid Sheikh Mohammed over 100 times, right? So it's it's sort of systematic drowning, and I think once he figured out they weren't going to kill him. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. What was the recent story that came out with him? What did they end up doing? They're not going to prosecute him. Is that right?
I don't know yet. I know that he and a few others put in a plea agreement, and then it was on the table. Then I think the Secretary of Defense invalidated it, but then a judge ruled that he couldn't invalidate it.
Oh my God!
So I think we're waiting to see where that's going to settle out. Yeah. But, it's like the fellow where they gave him a TBI, the guy who was involved in the Cole bombing, he can't go to trial because he's incompetent.
Really?
Yeah. So I think that's the disadvantage of
federal appeals court's thrown out the plea deal that would have allowed Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the alleged mastermind of the 9/11 attacks, to plead guilty in exchange for his life sentence without possibility of parole.
And so they invalidate it. So then it'll go back to the table about whether or not they can have a trial. Like I had to testify down there, but it's last year ago in May. Which is on all the stress research. And that's when the judge was trying to think about what happens under stress, and can you take a confession even if it was given while somebody wasn't torturing the person? And so the whole issue there was you take them back to the same room that they were tortured in.
Oh, wow.
So it was an interesting case to testify in, because from a science standpoint, we know this makes sense. We call that contextual conditioning. We can do fear conditioning and make you afraid of this coffee cup, right? Or this stimulus that elicits a fear response. But we know that your brain not only learns that this is bad, that the coffee cup might be bad or dangerous, it also learns, it's this room we're in. And so your brain is doing fear conditioning to the context and to the specific stimulus. And so the argument the government had been making at the time was, well, since we weren't torturing him at the time the guy confessed, it had to be a voluntary confession. And from a science standpoint, it makes no sense. If you've taken somebody back to kind of the similar environment they were in, and they still know these are all people from the government, and you've tortured them, it wouldn't be reasonable to think that they haven't got torture on their mind from a conditioning response level. So the judge said, no, can't use confessions that have been tamed under those contexts. So I'm assuming then that means it will all move back to pushing for a trial. Yeah. But it's amazing, right? This is like 2025.
It's insane.
And people were wrapped up in 2003. So, and we still have no trials.